We do begin with the big news of the day. Boeing shares getting a pop as the company fires its CEO. Let's get right to Phil LeBeau in Chicago with those details. Phil.
Scott, this is how it went down. The Boeing board of directors met over the weekend. It was via conference call. And on Sunday night, the Boeing board said, you know what? We've had enough of Dennis Muilenburg. So they reached the decision on Sunday night to fire him effective immediately. And basically, it comes down to this. A couple of things have happened in the last 2 months that the board said we've had enough. The broken FAA relationship, which we've talked about, and halting 737 MAX production. That's a monumental decision that Boeing reached last week, one they've never had before, where they voluntarily shut down a production line. So the new CEO is the former executive chairman, Dave Calhoun. He now takes over as CEO and president effective on January 13th. What's his game plan? It's pretty straightforward. Rebuild the FAA relationship, and to that end, he called the head of the FAA this morning. He said, look, we welcome rigorous oversight. Also a reset for the 737 MAX. That doesn't mean redoing all the work, but it does mean sitting down with the engineers, all the key people involved at Boeing, and saying, where are we? What realistically can we expect? What do we need to improve? What do we need to change? And then finally, repair airline confidence in Boeing. And to that end, when I talked with Dave Calhoun just a month ago about the 737 MAX, he alluded to the fact that getting the MAX back into service is job number one for this company.
It's not over when it's certified. There's no victory in that, right? We have to get the airplanes that our customers have put on the ground. We have to get them back in the air. We have to assist them every step of the way. And we have to get the airplanes that we've built and are ready for delivery to customers back in the air as well. That's a long program. It's at least a year, and it's a tough, important task.
As you take a look at shares of Boeing over the last couple of weeks, last month, look how it was under pressure there, trading all the way down into the 320s for a brief couple of days. Keep in mind that the airlines are, right now, they're expecting the 737 MAX to be recertified likely by early spring, Scott. But again, nobody is counting on that. There's no timeline that is out there. Those timelines, those are a thing of the past. We saw those constantly under Dennis Muilenburg. We are not going to see that under Dave Calhoun.
Yeah, you reported as well today, Phil, that Calhoun's already working the phones.
Yes, actively. And it's not just him. He has Stan Deal, the head of Boeing Commercial Airplanes, along with Greg Smith, the CFO, Tim Keating, who's in charge of government relations out of D.C. They were all on the phone with airline CEOs, the head of the FAA, that was who Dave Calhoun called today, amongst other people. They were talking with members of Congress. I mean, they realize the damage that has been done over the last 9 months. And at a minimum, what they're saying today is we realize what we've done wrong. We're going to turn the page. We're going to improve. And it's not going to happen overnight. Nobody's expecting it overnight. But at a minimum, they have changed their tenor and tone.
All right. We appreciate it, Phil. Thank you. That's Phil LeBeau for us in Chicago. So is this the catalyst Boeing needs to stage a turnaround in 2020? Guy Adami.
Welcome, Scott.
Thank you very much, Guy.
Great to have you here.
It's great to be here.
Well, so I know you watch this show religiously, and we've been saying for quite some time that, listen, the way the stock has traded since this happened back in March, 375 has been the upper end of the range, 320 or so the lower end. And I know categorically we said the stock will probably trade down to that August 14th low, which is 320. That's what happened, and it happened on significant volume. So is it the turnaround? No. But can this get us back up to 350 or so, which is a 50% retracement of the move we've basically seen now for 9 months? Yes. This doesn't change anything, in my estimation, in terms of the Boeing story, but it has been a great trading stock, and I still think there's room to the upside.
To your point, it doesn't get the planes back in the air quicker, but they had to do something.
Well, they had to do something, and so the irony is, as Phil pointed out, part of the reason for the firing may have also just been the grounding of the MAX production schedule. But in fact, the whole thing seems like it was about placating the FAA, and that the FAA was really offsides in terms of how they interpreted Boeing's actions here, and that Muilenburg was the guy. So I don't think that today's announcement does anything to change the trajectory of the 737, pun not really intended, but in terms of getting back into production. I don't think that this does anything in terms of the fundamentals of the company. I think this is actually what had to be done. I think Larry Kellner coming in also in the chairman's role, you talked about, and Phil talked about working the phones all day. Look, this is the ex-CEO of Continental Airlines. This is a guy who certainly knows what the customers need to hear. He's a guy that's going to help repair that brand. So I think they're doing everything they're supposed to do. This is also a very proactive move by this board when a lot of people felt they should have been proactive months ago. So good news for the stock that really has done nothing for 18 months.
Yeah, this thing's been such an overhang for the economy, too.
It has. Definitely has hurt. GM strike's another factor. But I wonder, just from a consumer standpoint, would you fly the 737 MAX? I mean, it's probably a question we've all asked. I mean, that seems to be the bigger issue.
Well,
forget whether it's safe. Would you fly it?
Yeah, I'd fly it. I'd fly it. Look, if this thing's back into production and I think it's ready to roll, I think, and most of the airlines out there, with the exception of, Delta gets a lot of points for having moved forward with Airbus, really, I think more tactically. But, yeah, I realize that there are a lot of folks that think that structurally you get into the MAX and where there have been issues with this plane, have they solved them? I don't think the safety issues right here and now for the stock price are at all part of what's going on.
I mean, I think it's also interesting that if the 320 level holds, it really depends on your time frame for this stock. This is something that's going to be going on for a long time. The other thing that I would note, too, is that when you look at ETFs, the diamonds, it's the largest weight in the diamonds. So if you're adding to your 401k, your IRA, you're really you're essentially buying the dip in the stock. It's also around a 1% weight in the SPY. So if you own those types of things, you own a little Boeing right now.
There are residual impacts, too. Stocks like GE, a customer of Boeing, for example, was specifically noted in Stephen Tusa's research last week as one of the reasons why he can't yet get bullish on a name like GE is because of the overhang on Boeing. So it's not just a Boeing story. There are other companies making components and other things that go into these jets that you need to get back in the air.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. I mean, and Steven still has a $5 price target on last I looked. I think it was on your show a week or so ago. So, listen, I can't say it's going to 5, but I think it's going to go probably to 8 before it goes to 12.5. But that's another conversation. In terms of your point, though, I mean, a Spirit Aerospace, for example, symbol is SPR. On a day that Boeing's up as significantly as it is, you would have thought just tangentially this stock would be up 1.5%, 2%. It was up maybe 0.4%. I think that's telling you something. So although you're seeing a relief rally in Boeing that can last, I think the problems that they face are still out there.
What is it telling you, Guy?
Tells me that the stock is going to trade between this 320 and 375 range, but I think the long term is this stock probably pushes back, in my opinion, to the December low, which was, I think, 295.
It's telling you that a warm body in the seat doesn't get the plane in the air tomorrow either.
There was there was an analyst on earlier today from Jefferies, I believe, on CNBC, and was saying 275 was her price target if the MAX doesn't come back into service. It would be bought by the military, but they would get something for it, but obviously not the full amount.
But your point, Scott, also, so first of all, GE Aviation is arguably the best part of GE. And if that's going to be impaired, there are certainly some impact. I don't think today's announcement does anything to change the schedule of when the MAX is back out there. Of the analysts that I read, nobody really adjusted. I heard everything from kind of March to April to people that are being more conservative, say, in the middle part of the year. But I think people have already, and I mean investors, and I certainly mean analysts, have already begun to do the impact on free cash flow and the impact on leverage. Those are the things you should continue to be watching. Net leverage of the company went from being not even a factor in a company that was spinning off free cash flow like it was going out of style. But the other thing that you're starting to hear about is to what extent is Boeing now really needing to be looking at innovation, and a company that we thought had overcome so many structural kind of practical issues they dealt with for years in terms of not finishing planes on time and actually having some questions about how innovative they're going to be. That may be coming back into the forefront. That was not an issue for 3 years as this company really re-rated.
Yeah. I'm even thinking about sort of like Wells Fargo-ish type things where the CEO who was on watch when the crisis happened is out, and then the next person doesn't necessarily have the job for all that long either. So there's a lot to develop still in this story. I'm thinking, Tim Sloan is not the CEO of Wells Fargo today. This gentleman, Calhoun's been around the company. who knows where all this is going to shake out.
Yeah, I think you're right, but I don't think anyone should expect this to be a short CEO, tenure. I think 2 to 3 years. I was reading Hunter K. at Wolf. That's his call. I mean, this is a practical, a responsible response, I believe, were his words in terms of what you're supposed to do here. You bring the chairman down to the CEO's role. You have continuity, and then you bring a guy into the chairman's role who basically comes from big airlines, and I think that makes a lot of sense.
All right. Well, if you've been watching the show, you'll remember our next guest called for Mr. Muilenberg to step down months ago. Let's bring in Ernie Arvai. He is president of the AirInsight Group. Ernie, welcome back.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Any surprises by what happened today?
I don't think so. It happened, in the season right before Christmas, which is never when you want to see something like this happen. But I think it's a strong move by Boeing to at least have a scapegoat here. Mr. Muilenberg wasn't getting the message through with the FAA and with some of the international regulators and customers. And I think those negotiations all were going sour. And then we had what perhaps was the final straw, the failure of the Starliner space capsule over the weekend to dock with the space station. And just the add up of all of these failures that have happened maybe that was the last straw for the board.
Yeah. So what's it all mean now? Now that Calhoun's in, is he the right person? There is some suggestion and pushback that they should have gone completely outside, just given the culture of what's transpired and how this could have happened in the first place.
I think it might have been wise to go outside, and if it were my choice, I would do that. But Calhoun certainly has a strong background in private equity, but he's also been a shareholder value disciple from his executive time at GE. Certainly, his private equity is shareholder value driven. And he's going to need to change the culture, but he's been associated with this culture as a board member for the last 10 years. So it's tough to change something that you've done. But fundamentally, this new CEO has to communicate with engineers on a knowledgeable basis, instill innovation back into the Boeing culture, which really hasn't happened as much over the last couple of years. And that may result from the cash flow on the 787 debacle when that program went into financial overdrive. But they've had the money to innovate, but they've spent it primarily to increase the stock price and on shareholders.
Yeah. If you're a shareholder, Ernie, if I could just jump in, if you're a shareholder tonight, should you feel better about Boeing?
I feel about the same as I did. I feel a little bit better in terms of the potential and at least a recognition of the problem. The question is now, can they solve the problem? And the jury's out until we see what happens. Certainly, he said a number of the right things in terms of transparency and communication, and I think that's important. I think Larry Kellner as the chairman can certainly communicate with airlines on a peer-to-peer basis, given that he ran Continental. So I think you've got a resource there that's certainly useful. But it's really the culture at Boeing that has to change. An engineer who has a safety issue has to be able to go back up to the chief engineer and say, "Hey, I'm not budging on this one. Back me, or I'll go public." Mm-hmm. It's a question of how far can you go and how far can you push things within the culture. And Boeing has culled that back for the engineers, and they're a little bit frustrated, I think, as a group in Seattle.
Yeah, Ernie, we appreciate your insights. Thanks for being with us once again.
My
Ernie
pleasure.
Arvai,
thanks.
Joining us there.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm reading Ernie's notes, too, and where he was getting at in terms of he's talking about the culture. He's really been he would have wanted to have seen a dividend cut and a company focus on their product line. So that's a bigger story here that I think we may start to hear more about.